Good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning. I am here with Tom has brought Karen with him, who has brought, say the name, Karen.
Carl Dondinel.
See, I practiced saying it, but I wasn't going to put myself in that situation.
And Carl
Oh
brought his cat.
God,
Yes,
you've got what is that? Some sort of predator?
it's decaf. Yes.
Oh Lord. I have something similar that lives in my basement that comes up every now and then for food. But oh Lord. Well anyway, Karen, Tom, Carl, I shall take myself and my big fuzzy logo away just with a reminder that we are 8 days away now and counting from the release of Alternative Liberties, a book that is going to. All I know is when they call, I'm going to tell them it was all Karen and Tom's idea. Okay. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. We're going to be talking mostly today about submitting short fiction and the ways in which people do it and all the pitfalls and joys of doing short fiction. Both Carl and Karen are active short fiction writers for Bob and for other people, and I will let each of them introduce and talk about what they are particularly interested in saying today.
Okay, I'll start since I've been on this show before. I'm KG Anderson, and I began submitting and publishing short fiction around 2013, and I've actually sold 11 stories to Bob Brown, but about another 30 stories to two more discerning audiences. And I also recently have been an editor on two of Bob Brown's anthologies, Southern Truths, which came out this winter, and Alternative Liberties, which is coming out in 8 days. And I'm going to talk about submitting and selling short fiction, both from the perspective of an anxious writer and from the perspective of the editor who sees all this stuff come in and has to deal with it. I'm going to put my colleague Carl on to talk a little bit about his perspective. Carl?
Thanks. So I'm Carl Dondinel, and I have been writing and publishing fiction for a lot of years. I started out when I was a grad student, and then reality came in by and took away my brain for 10 years or so, and then I went back to writing. I have not sold to Bob, but I've sold to quite a few other people. I have about 50 short stories now out in the world, a couple of dreadful poems, and some podcasts, not including this one. Yeah, I can certainly talk about the joys and pains of writing and submitting short fiction, and the advantages thereof. And, yeah, absolutely. Let's do this.
Yes, one of Karen's particular things that she likes to talk about is strategies for selling the short fiction. Writing it is one thing, selling it is another.
Well, Carl and I both attended the workshop Viable Paradise, and I recommend workshops to people. Everyone should be exposed to at least one. And it's not just for what you learn, which is a lot of professional standards and stuff, as well as writing techniques, but you meet a lot of people. And sure enough, the people you met in the workshop, the instructors, are generally editing magazines and anthologies, and your colleagues are getting accepted to them. And they can tell you a lot of the inside story about where to submit, as well as nightmares about where not to submit. So I'm a big fan of workshops, and that does not necessarily mean one of those 6-week all-absorbing workshops like Clarion West or Clarion San Diego. Viable Paradise is a week long. The Odyssey workshops are, I believe, about a week long.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
There are a number of mini workshops that go on, and a Cascade Writers is a long weekend.
Mhm.
And people are starting to come from all over the country to attend it. It's in Bremerton, Washington, and it is just superb. They have New York agents, New York editors, as you know, as well as some of the established local ones. All this is a good way to get you started, because it's really hard when you go to submit that first story. You're in a vacuum. You don't know who you're sending it to. You don't know what they want. And it can be very intimidating. Carl, you want talk a little bit about how you got into this?
Yeah, I'm going to take the other side of the fence, which was I did this as a professional writing student. I attended the University of Southern California's incredibly overpriced and slightly pretentious professional writing program back in the 80s. And I met some really great people, none of whom were in genre fiction, which is what I do. So my advisor talked about fantastical literature when he referred to me. I was the youngest person there, which was not great because I wasn't able to make those connections and not able to kind of push them out into the world. So many years later, coming back to it and deciding that I need to get serious about this, and I want to focus on my writing, not writing for corporations, not writing for whatever it is for myself. I need to write, do my stuff. Went to Viable Paradise. That I would say is a boot camp. So it's a week of here you are, you're isolated, you're pretty much off the internet, pretty much because the internet was so bad there. And you are meeting people that you wouldn't normally meet, and you were writing things under pressure. You were writing things to a point. You were meeting people who did it for a living. And if you were open to that experience, if you were willing to set aside all your shit, some of it, you could take a lot in. And I got more out of that week than I did in many, many years of stuff post grad school. So out of that, though, you come away with some habits and ideas and ways to approach your way of writing, not like the way of writing, the best way, but what works for you. And part of that is finding the markets that are good for what you write. Because I was submitting stuff to people that are like, no way. It's like I wasn't writing stuff that analog was going to be interested in. I wasn't writing stuff that the romance people were interested in. I wasn't writing horror. I was doing this very kind of middle of the road, lighter, speculative fiction, not quite epic fantasy, but interesting stuff. And finding an editor who listens to you, understands your stuff. And once you do, put your claws into them and don't let them go.
So I was in the same position that Carl was. I'd been submitting stories and getting rejections for about 2 years. And then I went to Viable Paradise, which, if it's a boot camp, it's the best food at a boot camp ever.
Yes, yes.
And I met wonderful people there. And at first, the wonderful people were there for me to commiserate with as I went back to submitting stories. But actually, my first major sale was the story I wrote on the airplane home from Viable Paradise. So obviously Viable Paradise made a difference for me.
Yeah, great.
Also made a difference in the way that I submit stories. Jim McDonald, who was one of our instructors at Viable Paradise, has a thing called Zog's Law. And I mean, this is a law. This isn't a piece of advice. This is to prevent you from having a bitterly unhappy experience. And Zog's Law is money flows toward the writer. It means you don't pay for vanity publishing. You don't pay to be published for exposure and that kind of stuff. And the reason that you don't is if people can't get it together to pay a penny a word, which is really a pittance.
Right.
If they can't get it together to have you sign a contract, go to PayPal and give you your $20 for your story, they aren't competent to put out a book or a magazine, which means the magazine's going to fold, the anthology is going to look like crap. You really want to work with people who are paying a minimum wage, which is 1 cent a word as a rule.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Jim or just the common parlance when someone says you can die from exposure. So don't write for exposure. Yeah, I think it's a hard thing to accept that your work is valuable. You put a lot of time in. If you're being paid by the hour, it's ridiculous. So you write a story, you polish a story, you submit it. You don't want to have to go through additional hoops. Let me rephrase that. You already have enough hoops out there as far as the work is concerned, the market is concerned. You don't want to put the additional hoop of, I have to pay you to read this. I have to deal with your weird email system. I have to wait 8 months to hear back that you even read my story. It's a hard lesson to put something out there and to realize that it's absolutely beyond your control. And so give it a good launch. Write the best story you can write, send it to the best place you can send it to, and then go to the next one.
And there's sort of an organic thing. Send stories to the magazines or the websites or the anthologies that you actually read. Yeah.
And that's, I admit that's kind of my sin, is I support a lot of magazines, but I don't always read the issues that they send me. Like, okay, I'm giving you some money and I'm promoting it. And occasionally I'll dip my toe in there and think, wow, this is really good. I want to write for these people. But it's also good to read and think, I don't think I want to write for this. It does not feel like a good fit. Don't waste your time on that.
You can also see if things are well edited and well presented.
Yes, thank you. That's an important thing. I recently was cleaning out a lot of stuff in the attic, and I came across very early publications of mine, and I took them out and I put them on the shelf to remind me of where I started from, and they were photocopied and stapled together and just typed up. And not corrected type, but typed and then a line through it that was bad. And like, wow, okay, people did that and paid you some pittance back.
The more professional the publication looks, the more professional you look.
Yes, thank you. It's absolutely true. You want to be able to.
I have two cats fighting back here, so.
That's okay. You want to be able to put on your website, this is where you can find my stuff. And you want to be able to tell people I've been published in X, Y, and Z. The flip side, of course, is you'll have stories that appear and then the publication disappears. And you're like, damn. And you're then relegated to, can I sell this as a reprint, or can I sell it to an anthology? And I want to kind of touch on that. Is a good story can have many lives. I was really pleased this last year in that I had a story that has been reprinted twice now. Once was kind of accidental. The guy had forgotten that he wanted to publish it, and then he came back to me and says, "Oh, is this still available?" And I said, "No, but somebody else bought it. You can have the reprint." And he went, oh, "Okay," and so he took the reprint. And meanwhile, I had sent it to somebody else as a potential reprint. And they eventually got back to me and said, "We really don't want this." They didn't say they wanted the second reprint rights. They just said they wanted to reprint it. So I'm like, okay, take the story again. It was a flash piece. It was a few dollars, but the story had legs. It was still out there. So I could point to it and say, oh, these guys had good artwork for it. So you should read it at this magazine.
Well, how many times has the 9 Billion Names of God been reprinted?
Right. And also
adapted to a
television show and things like that. But let's talk about kind of the process of submitting, Karen. So what is your process for kind of like to the end of the story or maybe it starts before you get to the end of the story?
Some of my stories go through critique groups, and some of them don't. It kind of depends on the timing. Sometimes I'll see a call. Well, actually, let's start back here. Where do you find markets? And the answer is that Duotrope and Submission Grinder list them.
Yes.
And you can go there and search based on what kind of story you have, the length, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or you can just wait till their newsletter comes in every week and it tells you this is a call. It's open for 3 weeks. It's open for a month. it's tomorrow, and do you have anything for it? But those are ways to find what's open, and some publications are always open, and you submit on a rolling basis. Anyway, you find the publication to match a story, and if you can, you get the story critiqued by your group or by a beta reader.
Yes.
And at this point, I'm going to switch hats and be the editor receiving the story. Format the story professionally. Do not have lots of little multiple hidden spaces in it. Don't put it in purple ink. Don't put it in a weird font. Many editors, if they get a story that is not in New York, in Times, in Courier, in Calibri, something they've specified, something normal, they just send it. They just junk it. Yeah. Don't do anything cute. The only thing that makes your story stand out is really great writing and professionalism. The other thing I would say is find out what Shun formatting. Yeah. There's actually a William Shun. He went to Clarion West. Great guy. He put up on the internet a recipe for formatting your story. SHUNN, Shun format. And it's what everyone uses. The modification to Shun that has come out is people no longer put their home addresses in. Yeah. That is recent, because we're not doing snail mail. You put in your email address, you put in your name. If your story is not well formatted, it isn't that they won't read it, but they look at it and they think, oh, this is going to be such a pain to deal with and remove all of this horrible formatting. In other words, you can set up Word so that it automatically indents your paragraphs. If instead you manually tab each paragraph, it means that the editor, if they accept your story, are going to have to remove all of this. So, make it look like it's going to be fun to work with you.
Yeah. Adam Troy Castro's first book, Lost in Booth 6, has an introduction by Dean Wesley Smith and Chris Rush about how the manuscript for the first story he submitted to them was so awful that they expected it to be a completely awful story, and then the story stood out so much that they had to buy it. But that is not the rule.
Yes,
very much the exception.
Don't handicap your story with weird formatting.
Right. There's the intermediary piece there too, Karen, about readers. Every magazine has readers, whether or not they tell you they have readers. It's very, very few editors have the space and time to read the slush, to read the stuff that comes in that they didn't ask for. So, and I've worked as a reader, and it's a fire hose. You get so much stuff that you learn to scan, you learn to look for things. And so the rule of first line, first paragraph, first page is critical. It's the hook. You must bring the reader into your world. You must bring them into the conflict. You must make it interesting, make them want to read further. Because if they don't, they have 20, 30, 40 other things to look at that day. And they're going to send you the thanks, but no thanks if you're right. No.
I have to say that as an editor, I am an exception. I don't do the first page has to grab me rule. I will read in for 3 or 4 pages. And the reason that I do it is newer writers. I taught the short story piece at NorwestCon last year, and I had 3 fairly new writers submit stories for it. And they were excellent stories. They all started on page 3. People often feel they have to explain their world, their characters, why we're reading the story. And you don't have to start with action. You can start, with, he thought it was the dumbest thing he'd ever did. Was there a way he was going to recover? Could be your beginning. That's not action. Dean Wesley Smith likes you to start with a paragraph of description of the scene that in some way reflects the emotion. But many people, it's 3 pages of explanation, and then what grabs you is there. And I am willing to read in for the 3 pages to get newer writers.
That's good. And I think that's where a beta reader is valuable, in that especially if you have beta readers who are not all your friends and don't all read the exact same authors. So they have slightly different views of what constitutes a good story, an interesting story, etc. I'm kind of laughing because I just sold a story, Karen, to Sudden Fictions, in which the first line I think was something like, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever done." So
Well, that's a Steve Brewstian start. Oh shit, there I was, which is a great type of opening.
right.
Yeah.
So your beta readers can tell you, as Karen said, and I think you've done that to me on one of my stories where you said, you know what, there was all this interesting stuff, but the story really started at the bottom of this page. And so the challenge then was, how could I kind of cut and as a writer, think about not throwing it away, but I like to think of it as slicing it off and grading it finely through the rest of the story. So you get that lovely bit of world building, the lovely bit of character building, but the stuff the reader wants to get to is now floated to the top. And so that's great. So to get out of your head and like, this is how I tell a story, or this is how I find my way into a story. And that's a really important thing, though. I don't want to dismiss that as a practice. If you as a writer are a pantser, if you don't plot everything out, if you kind of, what is this story actually about? Go ahead and write those first sort of pages of meandering through the desert until you find the oasis. And then you can go back and decide how much of the travel you want to keep, because it's much easier to cut than it is to add.
Yeah. Let's clarify the tiny bit of jargon you used there. Pantser, someone who
Yes.
writes by the seat of their pants, as
Right.
opposed to plotter, who outlines and does everything carefully in advance. Two quick things. One, there's been a lot of actually interesting discussion over in the chat about other places to find stories, and the question of whether there will be a second volume of Alternative Liberties or not has been mentioned, and the comment that if the first one sells well, there will be, seems to be very true from all I know about what's going on with it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about another type of reader. There are other types of readers that I know Karen has been using, which include sensitivity readers.
Yes. Yeah. So I have two different writing styles. One is a dark fantasy style, and the other one is a political writing, which is a lot of what I do for Bob, where I tell a real slice of life story about someone who is affected by the American political climate. And obviously, I'm getting into a lot of kind of controversial stuff there. And I wrote a story about a press secretary in the White House and their relationship with the president who doesn't want to run for a second term. The president does run for the second term. And then the president comes out as trans. And this was not something that my critique group was really set up to handle. And I ended up getting a sensitivity reader in. Remember, my protagonist is the press secretary. He is experiencing having his best friend from college, who he's been with all through politics, transition. And I brought in a trans woman to read the story for me and give me some feedback. And because of that, having a sensitivity reader, that really enabled me to go forward with the story after I sold it and presented to conventions, because I needed to know if I had a right to write the story, which the reader felt I did. So, but I felt, and I have used as an editor, when I have a writer writing a major character who is of their ethnicity and they are using dialect, I have used an outside sensitivity reader to say, how do you feel about hearing this? And, they're not giving you a yes or no. They're giving you feedback on the appropriateness of it.
No, that's really good, because I've definitely had a story get called at a professional magazine. It's like, okay, you're kind of writing out of your wheelhouse here just because you're trying to be different, and maybe you should not. Like maybe you should go ahead and set the story into a place that you're familiar with and you're comfortable with, or do your research, or go and do a little more research and talk to somebody who's of that culture. So I took that to heart, and went off and did something else.
I want to say that in the upcoming Alternative Liberties, we have an amazing story about a hack writer who is being paid, this is in the future, to take American classics and rewrite them to be appealing to the right wing that is running the schools and the publishing houses. It's the best story ever. Sorry, I just had to blurb that. It was so good.
No, that's good.
So back to submitting stories.
Yeah.
If you have 3 or 4 stories and you're submitting them places, one of the things you're going to discover is some places allow simultaneous submissions.
Yes.
So you could send the same story out to 3 markets at the same time, and you'll have a little juggling to do. Others have no simultaneous submissions, which means that if you look at Duotrope or at the submission grinder, I use the submission grinder because it's sort of geeky and statistical, you can see how long it usually takes that publication to accept or reject a story.
Yeah.
And some of them, it's a week. So you submit it for a week and you can't submit it anywhere else. That's cool. Some of them, it's a year and a half. So before you tie a story up for a year and a half, think about, are they that wonderful? Also, Carl, I think that since COVID, the market that selling a story has become a lot tougher, and the markets have become
tougher. Yes, it is absolutely. People found themselves at home with time and decided they want to be writers. And oh God, we can get into AI in a second, but there's definitely a lot. There are fewer markets. First of all, there unfortunately have been people who have left the publishing world. They've left the world of small press because they've had issues. They don't have time. They don't have money, etc. Nobody makes money. It's like everybody is always operating these tiny budgets. So it is more difficult. And I think that, to your point, before you tie a story down, think about ranking your markets a little bit. The most common ranking is money. Is like, I want to sell to the professional, followed by, I really love this market. I want to have a story with these people, followed by, they have great turnaround time, or they support certain social agendas that I approve of, etc. And rank your, I want to send the story out here first, and then these other places, and work your way down. Put your stuff in a spreadsheet, put it into a file, put it into a database, because I guarantee you, if you don't, you will find yourself sending a story to the same person twice that's already rejected it. And that's not very professional.
The submission grinder and Duotrope both allow you, they will automatically track your submissions for you.
Yes.
But in addition to that, for each story, I keep a 1-page Word document in which I list where I've sent it, and I put in notes.
Yes.
Like these people, send it to them, simultaneous submission. As soon as it gets back, get into the May opening for another magazine. I will also put in my calendar, on May 5th, you have 10 days to get this to so-and-so and this story.
That's a great point. I've started doing that. I'm getting better about that, where I look at a market and go, oh, they're closed now, but they're reopening in April and they have a special theme, and I have a story in my trunk that will match that theme. So I make a note on the calendar of April 1st, get the trunk story, look at it again, check it for typos one more time, and send it to that particular market. So it really is, it's a job that's apart from the job of creating, is tracking all your children that are out in the world. How many stories do you have kind of frothing right now, Karen?
I have 12 out on submission. And then I have 5 or 6 others that I'm actively working on and getting critiqued and getting ready to launch.
Okay. If I make it to 10, that's really good. And it may sound like a lot for people who are listening to this, but over the course of time, you will build up a backlog of stories, because if you happen to sell everything you write, mazel tov, good on you.
Ted Chiang.
Yeah. You can run your own podcast then. But as you write and as you come up with new ideas and things that don't necessarily get sold, or you start adapting them and modifying them, et cetera, you'll build up a backlog of stuff. And so you can keep sending it out there. And that's what you do is stuff comes in, make a note that it came in, make a note of anything they happen to have said. If they wrote you a personal rejection, take it to heart, or look at it and think, wow, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. And go to the next story.
If people write you a personal rejection, it generally means they're interested in what you're doing.
Yes.
I mean, a form rejection is, we received your X for this anthology. It does not suit our needs.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
And a personal rejection is, I really liked the beginning of the story, but I couldn't figure out what was happening to the character in part 2. You know, we'd like to see more from you, blah, blah. Carl mentioned the keyword theme. The market, it is harder to sell a story now than it was 5 years ago. And I'm sorry to tell you guys this. One of the ways to get to sell is if you are sending your story to the Magazine of Science Fiction and Fantasy or to Asimov's, those are general open publications, and you're competing against hundreds of other stories.
Mm-hmm.
If you are sending your story to an anthology on supernatural occurrences in the Appalachian woods, you are not competing against a lot of people.
Right.
There may be 30 people submitting. You have a much better chance. And I have to admit, I don't often write directly for an anthology. Sometimes I do, but I always look. I wrote a piece in a workshop about a murder that takes place at a beach home. And I just saw recently that there is a publication that is looking for murder mysteries on vacation properties. So this is an obvious stop everything you're doing, finish this story, send it to these people.
Well, you also had the early story, which was a Jack the Ripper story.
Yes.
Where will I ever find a Jack the Ripper anthology?
I had a Jack the Ripper story when I went to Viable Paradise, and I read it in a workshop we were doing, and people liked it. And I said, but nobody's buying Jack the Ripper stories. And I said, well, you know, can anyone help me find a market? And sure enough, a Jack the Ripper anthology in England, a very prestigious anthology, opened up. Somebody heard about it from Viable Paradise, told me, and I was the first story accepted for that anthology. So that was a big deal.
You just mentioned you heard it from VP. So that's another piece about if you do one of these workshops, most of them have some kind of a Slack channel or some other thing that they run, and it's worth subscribing to your newsletter or the site of the people you hang with, because they hear things and the community does support each other. It grows together. They hear about anthologies. They're putting one together. They need help. You'll find opportunities there. People are looking for first readers. And trust me, if you do a stint as a first reader, it's a lot of work, but you pick up a lot of really smart ideas about how not to write a story. Go.
Flash Fiction Online just put out a call for first readers.
I have read for them. Yes, they are a machine. They crank. And when I was there, it was really good because people gave honest feedback. They voted on stuff. The editors would kind of reach in and adjust stuff as necessary. It's good to see how the sausage is made.
We got a note. Amy Wolf asks in the chat, do you ever submit somewhere where they say, pay us and we'll give you feedback if we reject it?
No.
Well, actually, let me there are ones where submitting is free.
Oh, yes.
But if you want to get detailed feedback, you can pay a fee for that. That's a little bit different, but those do exist. And I've actually done it a couple times. However, I can report that the feedback, while good, was no better than anything that I had gotten from one of my critique groups. So,
yeah, I just submitted to somebody. I think they were asking for like $65 for extensive feedback. You're never going to make that money unless you're selling professionally. So to that point, yes, better to have your beta readers, better to have your critique group. And really, a critique group is a powerful force in your life. If you can get people to show up, if you can get people to read clearly and give feedback that is positive, I shouldn't say positive necessarily, but constructive, that's useful. And it's important to recognize that not everything you read is for you. As a writer and as a reader, if you see something, here's a market and it's gothic horror, like, yeah, I'm just not a gothic horror person, then don't try to write something that's not what you want to write just to try to get into the submission queue of that particular story. If you want to bring those elements into a fantasy piece that you're writing just as an exercise, go for it. That could be fun. But don't worry so much about, I must submit to these markets because they are the best markets. For whom? Ask yourself that question, because otherwise you'll get very frustrated, and maybe not for the right reasons. Let's talk about personal rejections that weren't your fault. You can have a story about dinosaur aliens that is the most amazing things. You send it to a magazine that publishes about dinosaur aliens, and they will tell you, we already bought one of these stories this month. And we're not going to hold your story. We're not going to save it for the next dinosaur alien issue. It's just, thanks, see you next time. And that's really hard to hear that, because you wrote this amazing story. That's the story that goes back out in the world, and it definitely gets tagged for anthologies for when Dinosaur Alien Anthology comes around.
I have to say that I was behind the scenes on one of those where sometimes you will get in a call a couple of stories that are really, really similar.
Yeah.
If you have a themed anthology and you said, talk about going back to your hometown. We want a horror story where you go back to your hometown. And two people have a horror story that involves running into their former teacher who has become strange. So now you've got these two stories. I was in a situation where we got the stories, and one of them was by a really famous writer. The other one was by an unknown writer. The unknown one was better, but we needed to sell the anthology. We needed a name on the front cover that said, by award-winning author JoJo. And we had to do it. And I felt terrible because I knew the other author, and I was actually aware of how crushed this person was by the rejection. And I got up to them and I said, look, I got to tell you something. You almost got in. You got really close. And of course, that person got a glowing personal rejection saying, we want to see more of your work. But yeah, it's really tough if you're an editor, because you need to sell books. The editor is not, a trust fund baby sitting there spewing out things. They're trying to probably doing this as a second job, as a labor of love, and they need to sell the anthologies.
Yeah. If an editor says they want to see more of your writing, they mean it.
Send them more of your writing. Yeah.
Yes. Believe them.
So I have to tell you something stupid. When I started out, I thought I was playing bingo, and I thought that my job was to sell one story to each magazine. And it turns out that's not what you're supposed to do. When you sell to a magazine and the editor likes you, you're supposed to keep writing for that magazine. And it took me a really long time to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, B. Morris Allen, Metaphorosis, that you and I have both appeared in his last anthology series. Yes, Sages of Metaphorosis. I think he's published about 6 of my pieces, and R.B. Wood, who does Sudden Fictions, I sold him 6 or 7 flash pieces last year. Now, that situation was, he needed lots of little stories for his weekly podcast, and he gave us a theme, and I figured out elements that he liked in the story. And so I saw it as like a little writing challenge. Can I do this in 2 days and give it to him in the time that he wants? And if he likes it, he'll buy it, and I can do it again next month. So there's a certain comfort in that, and you can still work on your craft at the same time because the editor knows your stuff. And the thing about B. Morris is that he'd call me on stuff. He'd say, "Yeah, I like this, and you're kind of lazy in this scene. I mean, can you punch it up?"
Yes, he's actually one thing, I read all these historical things about science fiction and these editors having these big philosophical discussions with their writers. And then I discovered people are like, yep, we liked it, we're buying it, funk. And it went out. And there aren't many people left, like B. Morris Allen and Bob Brown, who will have a dialogue with you about, I thought that worked. It fell apart here. I couldn't really feel it there. And those editors are really, really valuable, and it's important to listen to them.
Yeah, and support them, and promote their material. That's another thing about submitting and selling, is that if you have a good experience with an editor, with a publication, tell your friends, bring them on board. It's not a competition in that sense. You want to bring the good people over to that place. You want to bring other good writers to that editor so that you can all do better things together. It's not like you're going to hoard this knowledge and not tell anybody about it. The internet is out there. You can't keep anything a secret, but there's a lot of crap out there. So when you find something that is not crap, please, support it. Absolutely.
One thing that we haven't talked about is Codex.
Yeah.
I think Carl made me more of a code. I'm a member of Codex. And I think after you've got a few publications, I can't remember what their criteria is. This is not SIFWA, which is a different thing, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, but Codex, which is an online group. And they do all kinds of writing exercises, but they also are a place where you can specifically talk about a market. If you say, I sent to this market, I queried them, they didn't, because if you don't hear anything from them, you can write a query. Did you get my story? Have you made a decision? And you may discover that their decision was issued months ago and ended up in your junk file. But Codex is where people gossip. And it is a good place to go. Someone said, I had my story completely rewritten by this market and I want to withdraw it. I don't want the story completely rewritten by this crazy editor. And you'll find 3 other people going, they're nuts. I won't get near them. So Codex is valuable to kind of bounce off your concerns. Every once in a while. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Codex requires you to have one professional sale somewhere, or you've attended a professional workshop, and then you can petition to join, and there's no fees or anything. You just get your email logged with their site. And yeah, it's gossip, absolutely, but it's also supportive stuff. People can talk about, hey, I sold this story, great, and cheer them on. Because go ahead.
Alan Diane Shapiro says, one ProPub by Cephwa's old rules, with the only modification being interzone counts and a few anthology series that Cephwa didn't like or acceptable for Codex.
Okay.
Cephwa has modified its rules a great deal.
Yeah.
To acknowledge indie publications and the non-traditional ones, to the point that the editor over at Tangent Online went into a big rant the other day about how Cephwa has gone downhill because it's letting too many people in. It was kind of shocking, but I think I find Cephwa useful in many ways. It's really big. It's really sprawling. Codex is sort of where you go with immediate issues. Codex was valuable for me because during COVID, a number of magazines went into hiatus, and so you had a story there and you didn't hear anything back. They weren't answering your letters. And Codex was a place where you could go and they'd say, oh, that editor, they have COVID. They've been in and out of the hospital. Be patient. Or as opposed to they went bankrupt and will never be heard from again. And that was a good place to check that out.
Yeah, that's true. I actually found out about one magazine that had gone on forced hiatus through Codex, and like, oh, I'm not going to send them stuff for a while, and I'll keep an eye out. And I remember to come back again and again to see if that had changed. Yeah. So for short fiction, yeah, Sifway is a little less of an organization because they, on the other hand, they will provide sample contracts that are good to read and examine, just to make sure you're not getting caught up in something. I sold a story to an interactive site that did a little bit of animation. It was kind of fun, and they bought rights to the story for a while. It was a chunk of time. It's like, okay, we get the audio rights, we get the printed rights for this long, and you can't do anything else with it. And I thought, okay, but they offered a chunk of money to kind of compensate for that. So I thought, I'll mark my calendar. So in 2 years, when it reverts back to me, I'll be able to send that out again. But if I hadn't read those things carefully, I might have gotten stuck.
To go back to something that you said earlier about flash fiction, that you had gotten sold a lot of flash. I found that flash was a really good way to get to know editors. That people who weren't going to take a chance on one of my longer pieces would take a chance on a flash piece, and then I would get to develop a relationship with the editor, and that's been a really good experience.
I think there's a kind of old school physical thinking around that, of like, we have X number of pages in this book or in this magazine, and I have 2 end pages left that I can put. What can I put in there? I could put 700 words in there. So I'm gonna buy a 700-word story from somebody. So sometimes it's just they needed something to fill a gap. For websites that are specialized in that, like, okay, we are looking for things within this range. Sudden Fictions is one of them, 750 to 1,000 words, because that's the length he wants to read every week. He wants to read about 6-7 minutes of story. It's hard to write. It's really hard to compress your story down that far. And here's a secret. Here's a secret tip. If you write a flash story that does not work, can't work, it just feels like it needs to breathe, guess what? It's not a flash story, but it's going to be a really good 2,000-word story or 3,000-word story. And then recast it as a short fiction, and then send it to all the other markets that are out there that do short fiction. Don't kill yourself squeezing it down to a size that doesn't work. Flip side is, don't bloat a story to make a minimum word count of 5,000 or 6,000, which is kind of a weird thing. But
there was a real heyday of flash fiction online. Casey Ball had a website that just did flash fiction.
Yeah.
And, I missed out on that. I started publishing right when that ended, and it took me a while to figure out how to write flash fiction. And when I finally figured it out, I started selling to Jennifer Brozak was doing some series, 99 Fleeting Fantasies, 99 Terrors. And those were really good publishing experiences. Jennifer is one of the consummate professional editors, and working with her really lets you see how the professionals handle things, and that's a good experience.
Yeah.
So
I would say write what you can, and if the idea feels like it wants to be a bit bigger, go for it. I always have a conversation with my characters about that when it gets to that point of like, okay, you are threatening to become a novelette at this point. I'm not going to let you. Or my friend Stephanie says, like, yeah, oops, I wrote a book.
Well, Karen has sort of the opposite problem.
What do you mean?
In that people keep telling her that her short stories read like the first part of a novel.
That's a pacing issue.
Yeah.
But it also has to do with a world building issue. If you create a particularly complex world, people want to see other stories set in that world and stuff. Carl, I wanted to talk about how people deal with letters of rejection, including personal rejections. There is a civilized instinct to, when someone sends you a nice letter, gee, that was really sweet. We already have enough stories about flowers that turn into mermaids and we can't use this one, but we'd like to see more from you. there is this knee-jerk reaction to write back to them. There's
Yes.
also a knee-jerk reaction when someone says, someone once said to me and said, well, this is cheerful, isn't it? When he rejected my story. It was a dystopian story. What did he expect? But
Right.
there's a temptation to want to write back and either thank the person for saying something nice or argue with them about their total misconception about what you've done. Don't write back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons. They don't want you to argue with them. They are busy. When an editor has just handled 400 stories and has rejected 370 of them, they do not want to hear back from you. They do not want to hear back. Thank you. They do not want to hear back. But. They just don't want to hear back because your answering your email is disrupting everything else they're doing. And this is really not instinctive for you to not reply. But I urge you, unless the writer is a personal friend, don't write back.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started out, my instructor in grad school who said, get yourself a little personalized notepad, and this was back in the days of mail, and write a thank you note for everything that you do. So we kind of narrowed that back to send thank you notes to people who've done you a favor, a personal favor in terms of writing. And now it can be an email, but do not, I agree with Karen 100%, do not bother the editor. It's a process. There's a sending of those things out. On the other hand, I got a thank you note from an editor after he bought a story saying how much he enjoyed it. I framed that. I put it up on the wall to remind me that there are good people out there. So do not respond. It's sort of like being online and the trolls are there. Do not respond to the trolls. Do not feed them. Do not send things to bother your editor other than another story. If they send you the personal note saying, we didn't buy it, we enjoyed parts of it, we couldn't buy it, we had too many stories, we liked it. If they send anything to you that says, we liked it, send more, send more. Do not self-reject. Maybe they don't like your next story. Maybe they just send you, I don't care about this story. But put them in the good file and keep sending them things.
I would also suggest that if there are editors that you're getting personals from, I mean, I got a lot of personals from Charlie Finley, and I was never able to sell a story to him. Yeah. Ironically, his personals were so good. He once wrote to me and said, this is the first 2/3 of a really good story. And literally, I saw the third, wrote it, and sold it to somebody else a week later. But when you encounter a personal like that, arrange to meet that editor at a convention and go hear their panel, or get them to sign something. Or if they're teaching, a lot of the editors teach at small conventions and stuff like that. Take a class with them. I've gotten to take classes with Mary Robinette Kowal and Ellen Klages and Ken Scholes and David Levine. These are just little $50 to $100 classes, or at a convention, they're part of the convention. And those have been really good connections around submissions information and writing for them.
Yeah. So. That's a really good point. And I strongly encourage it. I have to fight my own kind of social anxiety around that when I go to cons. And I have, in fact, I pulled a guy to the side, an editor, saying, you've been sitting on my story for a while. Can I buy you a drink? Can we talk about this? And he was cool about it. Got to read the room, got to see if they're busy. But it's really important to put the human face, if you have an opportunity, on those emails. I'm going to give you one last thing about submitting, which is after you've written it, after you've gone through your readers, you're all ready to push the button on it. Don't, because I do this too often, especially late at night. Put it back, on the drive, put your computer off, go to bed, wake up the next morning, have some caffeine, scan it again, or read it aloud, just to see if there was anything that just goes clunk, and you get one last chance to fix it before it goes out seeking its fortune. Do yourself the favor, and unless the deadline is midnight, go the next day. Just be cool with it.
Yeah, And that's really hard to do. But
It is.
yeah.
Because you're so excited. You want to you want to pack a lunch for it and say, off you go to school. Do your thing.
So there also you're going to get a lot of rejections. I get a lot of rejections.
Yes.
And there are a couple schools of thought on what to do when you get rejected. The one thing you should not do is freak out and never look at the story again. Keep going. And some people believe I wrote the best story I could and I sent it to market A and they rejected it. So I'm just going to find market B and send it out. And I am so impressed with people who can do that. I am one of those people who opens the story again and looks at it and sees if I can tweak it a little. And then I send it to market B. But boy, whichever style suits you, keep it going.
Yeah.
I mean, do not abandon the story because you got one rejection. Because frankly, I used to get 5 rejections before I sold a story. And in today's market, I'm getting closer to 10, which is really upsetting.
Yeah, I sold one of my favorite stories after 21 rejections. So sometimes you've just got to find the fit. Yeah, I think I passed 300 rejections last year. I mean, I keep track of them because I'm going to keep going. Why not?
Yeah.
What's the alternative? Day job?
Yeah. Yeah. And Wrinkle in Time was rejected by 27 publishers before it got printed.
Anyway, I teach a class on submitting short fiction, which I'm hoping to teach on the JoCo cruise this year. And on it, I show screenshots of my statistics. David Levine does a blog post every year about his statistics.
He's fun. I like David.
That'll really keep you honest. So yeah.
All right. I guess we're getting toward the end here. Is there something we need to talk about, Tom?
Just I would ask if any of you had things you wanted to say as a sort of wrap up and closing. Bob will be coming back to push BQ Press, talk about the second volume of Alternative Liberties, if there is going to be one, and what will make it happen, and all that. But what would you want people to take away from today?
I sort of think that the submissions process is fun. It's kind of got some hunting and investigative part to it. I like finding markets. It's a little bit like gambling. And it's also cool because you meet people on the other side. There are a couple of writers. Carl's actually one of them. Holly Schofield is the other, who we have a high overlap in where we're published. And I think it's always sort of cool to see who you end up publishing with.
Yeah, you meet friends. I met some lovely people in different countries that I've published with, shared tables of contents with. I would say that submission and rejection are both dark arts. There's no logic to it. Sometimes it's crazy, and it's because there are people involved, and there are foibles and weirdnesses and market saturation and the position of the stars. So yeah, try not to take it personally. It stings sometimes, and keep going, because occasionally you will punch through, you'll get through, you'll sell that thing that you absolutely adored, and someone will come to you, or they'll write you a note on your blog and they'll say, I read this thing and I thought about it all day, it was so beautiful. So that I can live on a compliment like that for 6 months. So don't give up. That's what I would say.
All right.
Oh, I was going to wait for Tom to say something before I dived in.
Well, I was just going to say, all right, Bob, what have you got to say about us?
Well, I will tell you, when it comes to indents, if you use 5 periods, I'm going to read your story with a negative light. Okay, just that said. But I will also tell you, we at BQ Press, we publish a lot of writers who this is their first time out the gate. Okay, And so, what makes me proudest of the team of of editors we've assembled here is that they recognize that sometimes master's level skill at word is not the same thing as being skilled at writing.
Yes.
And so we try and overlook that, unless, of course, you send me a PDF, at which time I'm sending it back with extreme prejudice. And learn, my advice for writers is learn style. Go in and look and see what you can do with styles, and you will enjoy yourself. And anybody who ever wants to be bored with boring reading, send me a note and I will send you back the BQ Press Style Guide that ensures that you send us a story that is pretty much what we want to see in terms of how it looks, but that doesn't get you past the door. So I had to get all of that out of my spleen, and so now it's properly vented and I can go on. Oh, except for one more thing. The thank you notes to the editor, dudes,
He likes them.
we don't mind them. I've taken and forwarded the thank you notes we get sometimes to the entire team just to let them know that that rejection didn't ruin somebody, it inspired them. And when that's the case, then you've met your goal, because that's what we're here for. If any of us think we're going to retire big billionaires from editing small press anthologies or writing for small press, no. But if we get out of it the fact that we've added to the self-worth of another human being by being kind, or by being saying, then we are a success. And I love getting to work with some of these people. It is a pleasure. So, again, getting that out of my system. Now, somebody asked about Volume 2. Volume 2 is a function of the success of Volume 1. Okay? When alternative truths, our very first book, stayed number 1 in science fiction anthologies for a little over a week, and in the top 10 for almost 6 weeks, that said, yeah, we probably ought to put out more alternative truths. And so we upped our pay scale to 3 cents a word, Yahoo, and put out a much thicker volume. And we still broke even. And so the big thing for most small press, since none of us that are really into being small press are in it for the money or the recognition, we're in it for whatever reasons we are, then breaking even is probably one of the key points that we look at. It says, can I go to my wife and say, honey, I want to put out another book? And she says, how much did you lose on the last one? And you say, honey, it's not, but it is. So that's why, you're there. That's why you have word limits. That's why you have budgets. That's whatever. But we are proud to be putting out this book, Alternative Liberties. It's big. It's almost 400 words. It's got
400 pages, not 400 words.
Do what?
400 pages, not 400 words.
400 pages, close to 90,000 words. Yeah. Oh, you printed it out?
That's how you proofread.
No, that's how you proofread.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is.
And I respect everybody's individual style. My style is to put it in a nice big font with a focus, so I'm looking at a limited number of words, so I'm not reading the whole page at a glance and working through it. And as Karen and Tom will both tell you, the results are incredible. Hey,
So
I don't care who the proofreader is. Answer me this, Ken. Have you ever, or I mean, Carl, have you ever found an error in a proofread manuscript?
of course.
Yeah, we all
Yeah.
do. It's never going to be perfect. Our objective is to make it as good as we can make it.
So you know how to find errors in your manuscript. The traditional
Publish
method is to send it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Tom, Bob, Karen, this has been lovely. I have my regular writing group waiting for me on another screen, and so I'm going to shift over there. Thanks so much for inviting me. I've had a blast. And if people want to hear me natter on in the coming weeks, I'm going to be on the Story Hour, which is, you can find it on the Book of Faces. I will be reading my piece, Jizo Rides the Bus, which is an odd little thing.
well, then let me say I'm going to thank all of you for showing, and I'm going to push this little button they have here that says, "Oh, you want to end this podcast?" So I'm going to push that as soon as I find it. They keep tweaking the screen.